Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in the gun you draw, but in the hand you extend to a stranger in the storm. True strength lies not in never falling, but in rising. The winter of 1882 struck Meadowgate, Colorado with merciless fury. Snow piled against weathered storefronts, while bitter winds howled through empty streets. Elizabeth Morgan, a plump woman with gentle features, stumbled through knee-deep snow in a torn dance hall dress. Her breath came in ragged puffs as frozen tears clung to her cheeks. She had come by train as a mail-order bride, full of hope for a new life. Instead, at the railway station, she met not her intended husband, but Gus Thornton's gang who deceived her with false promises. For weeks, Elizabeth had been held captive in the gang's mountain hideout, forced to entertain the Outlaws with her theatrical dancing skills from her past life on stage. The memory of their leering faces and crude laughter still haunted her as she pushed through the blizzard. Tonight, during the storm's chaos, she had finally escaped through a broken window while her captors lay drunk around their fire. Now, with nowhere to go and no money, she faced the Colorado wilderness alone, her fancy boots offering little protection against the merciless cold. A drunken cowboy named Clayton Blake emerged from the saloon's swinging doors, his spurs jingling against the wooden boardwalk. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Elizabeth's bedraggled form with predatory interest. "Well, well, what have we here?" he slurred, blocking her path. "Fancy dress like that don't belong on these streets, lady. You got money to pay for passage, or should I turn you over to Sheriff O'Brien as a vagrant?" His hand moved threateningly toward the gun at his hip, while Elizabeth backed away, terror freezing her more thoroughly than the mountain wind. "Step away from the lady, Blake." The voice cut through the storm like steel through silk. A stranger emerged from the shadows, his weathered face bearing fresh scratches and his dark coat dusted with snow. Ethan Maverick stood with quiet authority, his hand resting casually near his holster. Blake's drunken bravado faltered under the stranger's steady gaze. "This ain't your business, Maverick," Blake muttered, but he was already backing down. Ethan's voice remained calm but carried unmistakable menace. "I'm making it my business. Now move along." Blake stumbled away, cursing under his breath into the night. Ethan offered Elizabeth his arm with gentle courtesy. "Ma'am, I run a small ranch outside town. I could use help with cooking and housekeeping if you're willing to work honest for fair wages and a roof over your head." Elizabeth studied his scarred face in the lamplight from nearby windows, searching for deception but finding only weary kindness. Her choices were stark: trust this stranger or face the frozen wilderness alone. "I accept," she whispered through chattering teeth. Ethan nodded and led her to a covered wagon, helping her climb onto the wooden seat before wrapping a thick buffalo hide around her trembling shoulders. The 3-hour journey through snow-laden prairie tested Elizabeth's endurance as the wagon wheels creaked through frozen ruts. To distract from the cold, she found herself telling Ethan her story: how Thornton's men had posed as representatives of her intended husband, how they'd dragged her to their mountain camp, and how she'd finally escaped during tonight's blizzard. Ethan listened without judgment, his steady hands guiding the horses through the storm. "I've been running my father's spread alone since he passed," he said quietly. "Could truly use the help, and you'd be safe there." They arrived at a modest single-story ranch house with a sturdy barn and outbuildings barely visible through the swirling snow. Ethan led Elizabeth inside, lighting oil lamps that cast warm shadows across simple but clean furnishings. He showed her to a small bedroom with a handmade quilt and wooden dresser. "This was meant for—" He paused, then continued, "for someone else once. It's yours now, for as long as you need it." He provided her with dry wool clothing and thick socks, then left her privacy to change while he prepared a simple meal in the kitchen. Over supper of cornbread, fresh milk, and smoked venison, Ethan assured Elizabeth that his home was hers for however long she wished to stay. When she expressed worry about town gossip regarding an unmarried man and woman with her tainted reputation living under one roof, Ethan's jaw set firmly. "Gossip's tongues won't change how we run this ranch or how we treat each other with respect," he declared. For the first time in months, Elizabeth felt a spark of hope kindle in her heart. Perhaps, despite everything that had happened, she might still find the new beginning she dreamed of when she first boarded that train. Elizabeth's first morning at the ranch nearly ended in disaster when she attempted to prepare breakfast. The temperamental wood-burning stove proved more challenging than any stage performance she'd ever given. Flames leaped dangerously high as she added too much kindling, singeing her eyebrows and filling the kitchen with smoke. Ethan rushed in from the barn, quickly adjusting the dampers and airflow. "Takes practice," he said calmly, showing her the proper technique without a hint of irritation. "My mother struggled with this same stove for years. You'll master it soon enough." His patience surprised Elizabeth, who expected criticism about her theatrical background. Over the following days, Ethan quietly began leaving small gifts: warm mittens by her door, a sturdy wool shawl draped over her chair, a jar of precious maple syrup to sweeten her morning coffee. Most treasured were the newspapers he brought from town, knowing her hunger for reading material. Elizabeth discovered his thoughtfulness extended beyond mere courtesy. He genuinely cared for her comfort and well-being. When she thanked him, he simply nodded and changed the subject, uncomfortable with gratitude. His actions spoke louder than words, gradually rebuilding her faith in human kindness after months of cruelty and deception. While dusting the mantelpiece, Elizabeth found a daguerreotype of a beautiful young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. When Ethan discovered her holding it, his face grew solemn. "That's Sarah," he said quietly. "We were to be married 3 years ago, but pneumonia took her that winter before our wedding." Elizabeth carefully replaced the photograph, understanding now why he'd been alone. "She believed people deserved second chances," Ethan continued. "Said a person shouldn't be judged by their worst moment. Sarah would have liked you, Elizabeth. Would have been your friend without hesitation." His words touched a deep wound in Elizabeth's heart. One morning, Ethan returned from checking the cattle with troubled news. He'd spotted fresh horse tracks near their property line, several riders who'd circled the ranch during the night before disappearing into the hills. "Could be drifters looking for work," he said, but his hand instinctively checked his rifle. "Or it could be trouble. Keep the doors locked when I'm out in the fields and stay close to the house." Elizabeth's newfound peace shattered as cold fear gripped her. Had Thornton's gang tracked her down? The thought of returning to captivity made her stomach clench with terror. Safety, she realized, might be more fragile than she'd dared hope. Ethan returned from town with deeply troubling news that made Elizabeth's blood run cold. "An elegant gentleman named Remington Morgan was asking questions about you at the general store," he reported grimly. "Claims to be your uncle. Says he has urgent family business to discuss." Elizabeth's face went pale as old fears resurfaced. Remington was no uncle but a dangerous man from her past, who'd destroyed lives without remorse. "He's not family," she whispered, her hands trembling. "If he's found me here, then I've brought terrible danger to your doorstep, Ethan. Remington Morgan ruins everything he touches." But Remington wasn't Elizabeth's only concern. Ethan had also heard disturbing reports that Gus Thornton's gang had been spotted raiding homesteads throughout the territory, apparently searching for something, or someone. "They've been asking about a woman who escaped during the blizzard," Ethan said quietly, offering a reward for information. Elizabeth's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized the net was closing around her. Two different threats now hunted her: the outlaws who wanted to drag her back to their mountain hideout, and Remington, whose intentions were perhaps even more sinister than the gang's crude brutality. Elizabeth finally revealed the dark truth about Remington to Ethan, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I was 16, he attacked a girl named Grace. When her family tried to seek justice, Remington bought off witnesses and destroyed their reputation until they fled town in shame." Tears streamed down her face as she continued. "I tried to tell my father the truth about what Remington had done, but he convinced Papa that I was lying out of jealousy. Remington has power, money, and no conscience. He's probably told everyone I stole from our family business to justify hunting me down." That very night, riders surrounded the ranch house as Elizabeth and Ethan sat by the fireplace. Torchlight flickered outside the windows as Gus Thornton's voice boomed through the darkness. "Send out the woman, Maverick! She belongs to us!" Gunfire erupted as Ethan grabbed his rifle and returned fire through the shuttered windows. A bullet grazed his shoulder, drawing blood that stained his shirt crimson. "Stay down!" he shouted to Elizabeth as glass shattered around them. After a fierce but brief gunfight, the outlaws retreated into the night, but Thornton's parting words chilled Elizabeth's soul. "We'll be back," And next time, we won't be so gentle. The next morning brought Remington Morgan himself, arriving in an elegant black carriage with two hired gunmen. Dressed in a fine wool coat and polished boots, he carried what appeared to be official court documents. "My dear niece," he announced with false warmth, "I've come to rescue you from this unfortunate situation. These papers show you stole $150 from our family's business office." Elizabeth's stomach lurched as she recognized the forged signatures. Remington had always been skilled at creating false evidence, using his wealth and connections to manufacture whatever truth served his purposes best. When Ethan demanded to see proper legal warrants, Remington's mask of civility slipped away like morning mist. "I don't need permission from some dirt farmer," he snarled, drawing a pearl-handled revolver. "Elizabeth, you're coming with me whether you like it or not. I have plans for you back east." His words carried an undertone of menace that made Elizabeth's skin crawl with remembered fear. She understood now why he'd tracked her across the territory. This wasn't about stolen money or family obligation. Remington had darker motivations, and her isolation here made her vulnerable to whatever scheme he'd devised. A violent struggle erupted when Ethan stepped protectively in front of Elizabeth. Despite his wounded shoulder, he grappled with Remington while the hired gunman hesitated, unsure whether to interfere. During the fight, Remington managed to slash Ethan's good shoulder with a hidden knife, drawing fresh blood. But Elizabeth seized the moment, grabbing Remington's dropped revolver and pointing it steadily at his chest. "Get off my land," she commanded, her voice stronger than she'd felt in years. "I know about your embezzlement schemes, your forged land deals, and what you did to Grace. Leave now, or I'll tell everyone the truth." With both shoulders bleeding but his resolve unshaken, Ethan stood beside Elizabeth as she held Remington at gunpoint. Faced with the threat of exposure, Remington retreated to his carriage, but his parting words were venomous. "This isn't over, Elizabeth. I have powerful friends and influence you can't imagine." That same evening, Thornton's gang returned for another assault, but this time Elizabeth and Ethan were ready. Fighting side by side, they repelled the attack, wounding several outlaws who fled bleeding into the darkness. As dawn broke over the ranch, Elizabeth realized she'd found something worth fighting for, and someone willing to fight beside her. A telegram from the Denver Sheriff's Office brought devastating news that shattered Elizabeth's fragile hope. Remington had escalated his accusations, now claiming she'd stolen $400 and producing 4 witnesses willing to testify under oath to her guilt. Worse still, he'd informed authorities about her connection to Thornton's gang, painting her as a willing accomplice rather than a victim. The legal noose was tightening around her neck, and Remington's wealth could buy the finest lawyers while she had nothing. Elizabeth sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the impossibility of fighting such powerful lies with only the truth as her weapon. As despair threatened to consume Elizabeth, Ethan knelt beside her chair despite his wounded shoulders. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "I need you to know something before this goes any further." His weathered hands gently took hers as he looked into her eyes with profound tenderness. "I love you, not because you need rescuing, and not despite your past, but because of who you are, your courage, your kindness, your strength. This house became a home the day you walked through that door." His words pierced through her fear like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, offering something she'd never dared hope for again. "But you don't know everything about my time with the dance halls, or what I endured with Thornton's gang," Elizabeth protested, shame coloring her cheeks. "There are details that might change how you see me." Ethan's grip on her hands tightened reassuringly. "I know what matters most, that you're brave enough to fight for what's right, gentle enough to care for others, and strong enough to survive what would have broken lesser souls. Whatever happened before doesn't change my feelings. Our love can overcome Remington's schemes." His unwavering faith in her began to rebuild the confidence that months of abuse had shattered. When Sheriff O'Brien arrived with deputies and an arrest warrant, Ethan quickly negotiated precious time. "Give me 1 hour to send a telegram to Circuit Judge McClellan in Denver," he requested. Grace, the girl Remington attacked, was his ward before her death. The judge has been investigating Remington's business dealings. O'Brien, respecting Ethan's reputation, agreed to wait. As Ethan rode hard to town, Elizabeth paced the ranch house, her heart torn between hope and terror. Everything now depended on whether distant justice could reach them before Remington's web of lies and corruption destroyed their chance at happiness together. Judge McClellan's telegram arrived like answered prayers, bringing hope where only despair had existed. The message was clear and decisive. Remington Morgan was under federal investigation for fraud and embezzlement, and Grace's death had been reclassified as murder after new evidence emerged. Additionally, Thornton's gang was wanted for robbing postal stagecoaches, making them federal fugitives. Federal Marshal Richardson was already en route with a full posse to apprehend all parties involved. Elizabeth's legs nearly gave way with relief as the crushing weight of false accusations began to lift from her shoulders for the first time in months. Marshal Richardson arrived with 6 armed deputies, their badges gleaming in the afternoon sun. He listened carefully as Elizabeth recounted her entire ordeal: the deception at the train station, her captivity with Thornton's gang, her escape during the blizzard, and Remington's attacks and threats. "We've already disproven the testimony of Remington's paid witnesses," Richardson reported grimly, "and the doctor who examined Grace's body confirmed she died from injuries consistent with violent assault. Remington's web of lies is unraveling faster than he can weave new ones." Justice, it seemed, had longer arms than Elizabeth had dared believe possible. The marshal's investigation had uncovered far more than Elizabeth realized. "We found Thornton's mountain camp and arrested most of his gang 3 days ago," Richardson continued. "They confirmed you were held against your will and described your escape during the storm. As for Remington, his business partners in Denver have provided evidence of his embezzlement schemes dating back years. He's been systematically stealing from investors and forging land deeds." Elizabeth felt years of fear and shame melting away like spring snow as the truth finally came to light. The nightmare that had defined her existence was finally ending. All charges against Elizabeth were immediately dropped, and warrants were issued for Remington's arrest on multiple federal charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy with known outlaws. "You're completely cleared, ma'am," Marshal Richardson assured her with a tip of his hat. "Remington Morgan is now the one being hunted, not you. You're free to live your life without looking over your shoulder." As the marshal and his men rode away into the sunset, Elizabeth stood on her porch beside Ethan, feeling truly safe for the first time since stepping off that train months ago. The burden of false accusations and manufactured guilt had finally been lifted from her heart. With her legal troubles resolved and the gang captured, Elizabeth slept peacefully for the first time in months as spring began awakening the Colorado prairie. Wildflowers dotted the meadows while warm breezes replaced winter's bitter winds. One morning, as golden sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, Ethan approached her with nervous determination. He held a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother, turning it slowly in his calloused hands. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm not asking you to marry me because you need protection or because it's proper. I'm asking because I love you and want to build a future together. Your dancing background, everything you've survived, it only shows me how strong and courageous you truly are," Ethan continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "I don't want to rescue you, Elizabeth. I want to choose you, every day, as my partner and equal. This isn't about trading your dignity for safety. This is about 2 people who found something rare and precious together." He extended the ring toward her with trembling fingers. "Will you marry me? Not because you have to, but because you want to." Elizabeth's heart swelled with joy as she realized this proposal came from love, not obligation or circumstance. "Yes," Elizabeth whispered, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Yes, I'll marry you, Ethan Maverick, because you've shown me what real love looks like." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, tears of happiness replaced the tears of fear she'd shed for so many months. This wasn't about being saved. It was about choosing to build something beautiful together. Just then, the postal rider arrived with a letter bearing her father's familiar handwriting. Elizabeth's hands shook as she broke the seal, unsure what message awaited her after all the lies Remington had surely told about her disappearance. Her father's letter was filled with remorse and heartfelt apologies. "My dearest Elizabeth," it read, "Marshal Richardson visited me with the truth about Remington's crimes and your innocence. I'm ashamed that I believed his lies instead of trusting my own daughter. Can you ever forgive a foolish old man who failed you when you needed him most? I don't expect you to return home, but I pray someday I might meet the strong woman you've become, and perhaps earn back a small place in your life." Elizabeth wiped away tears as she placed the letter beside Sarah's daguerreotype on the mantel, symbolically joining past and present in forgiveness. Spring transformed the ranch as Elizabeth and Ethan worked side by side, repairing fences damaged during the outlaw raids. They planted a vegetable garden behind the house, their laughter echoing across the prairie as they debated the merits of different crops. Elizabeth had never imagined such simple joy could exist, the pleasure of honest work shared with someone who valued her opinions and cherished her company. They painted the front porch a cheerful yellow, the color of prairie sunflowers, while making carefree plans for their wedding and future together. The ranch was becoming truly theirs, shaped by their combined dreams and efforts. Elizabeth placed her father's letter next to Sarah's daguerreotype on the stone mantelpiece, creating a small shrine that honored both past and present. The gesture felt symbolic. She was no longer running from her history, but integrating it into her new life. While she wasn't ready to leave Ethan and travel back east just yet, she found herself considering the possibility of someday visiting her father. "If you decide to go, you won't go alone," Ethan assured her, understanding her conflicted feelings. "Whatever you choose, we'll face it together." His unwavering support gave her confidence to consider healing old wounds when the time felt right. The ranch came alive with returning songbirds and green shoots pushing through the rich soil, mirroring the new life Elizabeth and Ethan were creating together. They expanded the chicken coop and discussed buying cattle to graze the back pastures. Every evening, they sat on their freshly painted porch watching spectacular sunsets paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Elizabeth marveled at how completely her world had changed, from captivity and terror to love and hope. The nightmares about Thornton's gang were fading, replaced by dreams of the family she and Ethan might build in this peaceful valley. Sheriff O'Brien rode out to bring the final news they'd been waiting for. "Caught the last of Thornton's gang hiding in a cave near Silver Creek," he reported with satisfaction. Remington Morgan was arrested in Denver trying to board an eastbound train with a satchel full of stolen money and forged documents. Both threats are finished for good. As the sheriff rode away, Elizabeth and Ethan stood together on their porch, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The danger that had shadowed their early days together was finally, completely over. They were free to build their future without fear, surrounded by the endless possibilities of the frontier. As sunset painted the Colorado sky in crimson and purple hues, Elizabeth and Ethan stood together on their porch, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a desperate encounter in a winter storm had blossomed into something neither had dared hope for: a love built on truth, respect, and shared courage. Elizabeth gazed across their land, remembering the terrified woman who'd stumbled through that blizzard months ago. That frightened fugitive had found not just shelter, but a home where she was valued for who she truly was, past and all. "Do you ever regret that night in the snow?" Elizabeth asked, her hand finding Ethan's scarred fingers. "If you hadn't stopped to help a stranger, your life would have been so much simpler." Ethan turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. "Simple isn't the same as meaningful," he replied softly. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions of living. You brought purpose back to this place, laughter to these rooms, and love to my heart. I'd face those dangers again without hesitation if it meant finding you." His words wrapped around her like the warmest quilt. This place had become more than refuge. It was truly home, where Elizabeth was accepted completely, with all her scars and secrets. She'd learned that love wasn't about perfection, but about choosing each other despite imperfections. In a land where danger could strike without warning, and the past never fully released its grip, they had still chosen each other, proving that sometimes the bravest act was simply staying and fighting for happiness. Their story wasn't about a perfect woman being saved by a perfect man, but about two damaged souls healing together and creating something beautiful from their shared strength. As the last light faded from the western horizon, Elizabeth and Ethan walked hand in hand into their home, leaving the ghosts of winter behind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: ranch work, weather, the endless demands of frontier life. But they would face everything together. They had found what many search for their entire lives: love built on truth rather than illusion, partnership rather than rescue, and hope rather than desperation. In the vast wilderness of the American West, Where survival often meant standing alone, Elizabeth Morgan and Ethan Maverick had discovered that the greatest triumph was choosing to stand together, whatever storms might come.